As soon as breakfast was over, Tolly set off to his uncle's farm. After my grandmother and Kidda had cleared and washed the bowls and cups, they went back to the room with my mother and aunt. There they were busily sewing several new tunics. Kidda had told me that one was for me and one was for Tolly. They were going away presents. Meanwhile, my grandfather and brothers prepared to go hunting and fishing, and I went to the fjord with my father and uncle. As usual, I began my working day in the forge by adding wood to the fire, and then used the bellows to fuel the flames. Today was no ordinary day, though. After today, I would own my very own sword. It was not unusual for a boy like me to own a sword. Although my father was a Carl, able to own land or a business, or to fight and trade, he was not a Jarl, a member of the elite nobility. Swords, such as the one my father was about to make for me, were usually reserved for the Jarls. I had seen such swords carried by nobles as they arrived in our town to participate in the thing, our local assembly. The thing was held outdoors once a year, and it was time for carls, such as my father and uncles, to sit together with jarls to discuss issues, settle disputes, judge crimes, and make decisions about our community. Even though the carls were a larger group, the jarls had greater authority. It was at one of these assemblies that it had been decided that 25 young men from our town should leave and go to Iceland. It was at the same meeting that Lord Toki had announced that my father had saved not only his life, but the king's life. My father had uncovered a plot that people were planning to kill both Lord Toki and the king. He had overheard two spies talking in his workshop. My father had prevented this terrible crime from happening. To thank my father, Lord Toki wanted to give me a nobleman's sword. Once the fire in the forge was burning fiercely, my father was ready to begin. He had explained to me many times that maintaining a strong fire in which wood is burned to extreme temperatures was a secret to being a good blacksmith. He told me that the iron is only as good as the flames that shape it. Bjorn, I want you to pay close attention to everything I do. You need to understand that making a strong sword is very difficult. It requires much skill, my father explained. I will, I said earnestly. And so he began. I watched carefully as my father bundled together bars of iron. As I watched, the heat from the flames warmed my skin, turning it pink, and before long I was dripping with sweat. I watched my father as he worked carefully and intently. As the iron bars softened and connected, my father used a variety of tools to draw out the metal into the length of a sword. He worked to wield the pieces of metal together. As he pulled and stretched the metal, he twisted it. Slowly, the shape of a sword began to appear. Do you see what has happened, Bjorn? He asked, though I could tell that he didn't really expect an answer. The heating and twisting of the different kinds of metal has created a composite of iron that now has the necessary strength and flexibility for a sword blade. Yes, I see, I responded. My father placed the softened metal upon the anvil and continued to twist, hammer, chisel, and file it into shape. As soon as he was satisfied with its shape, I knew he would plunge the hot metal into a tub of cold water to cool and harden it. Once the iron had cooled, he would begin to sharpen the blade. Although I did not yet know how to make a sword, I did know how to make spear points, axes, and nails, as well as knives, pots, and pans. That much I had already learned from my father. Father, I have thought of a name for my sword, I said, as I continued to watch him work. I want to name it Foe Biter. My father looked up from his work. That is a fitting name for a warrior's sword, he said seriously. This sword will serve you well. You can think of me and our family when you are called to use it. I stared at the sword for several moments and did not look up. I could feel the sweat and tears merge into one steady flow of water droplets that fell from my face onto the earthen floor. At that moment, as my father spoke to me, I wanted to stop time, stop it completely so I could stay with him forever. For the rest of the day, my father, my uncle, and I worked together in the workshop, melting, shaping, and cooling iron. From time to time, people stopped by to collect something my father or my uncle had made for them. They were paid in either silver pieces or other goods that my family could use. As the day wore on, my father and uncle began to talk about the evening of storytelling that was scheduled to take place in the main marketplace. This was a common practice before special events such as weddings, festivals, or voyages. Poems of old were told by skalds so that we would know our history. It was considered important that these sagas be handed down through the generations and never forgotten. Our town had two skalds who had committed to memory dozens of sagas of Viking history and adventures. One of the skalds would be traveling on the cargo ship with Tolly and me. He was charged with the responsibility of keeping the sagas alive in our new home. There was also a boy who lived on the same street as Tolly and I, who had been an apprentice to this skald. He had already spent many months with him, learning these poetic tales. He too would keep our history alive. And so, in the late afternoon, after eating a dinner of fish, vegetables, and barley bread, instead of preparing to go to sleep for the night, my family, along with many others, made its way to the marketplace at the center of town. A large fire had been lit, and many people were already seated around it. The two skalds sat upon a wooden platform beside the fire. Once everyone arrived and was settled, the first skald stood up and began to recite a saga of bravery and adventure. I looked into the eager faces of my family and friends, their eyes lit by the flickering flames of the fire, and knew in my heart that this would be the last time that we would all sit together to listen to these ancient tales.